The wind was the first thing you noticed out on the Walker Ranch. It wasn't always loud, but it was always there, moving through the tall grass like a constant sigh. For John Walker, it was just part of the background noise of his life. A life that had gotten very small and very quiet. 2 years had passed since he lost his wife, and in that time, his world had shrunk down to 2 things. The 500 acres of stubborn Wyoming land he was trying to keep afloat. And his daughter, Lily. She was 8, a little wisp of a thing with eyes that seemed too big for her face. She used to be all laughter and questions, a constant hum of energy. Now she was as quiet as the house they lived in. She moved through the rooms like a ghost, her footsteps barely making a sound on the old wooden floors. John would find her sometimes, just staring out the window at the empty stretch of land, a stuffed rabbit clutched tight in her arms. He didn't know how to fix it. He was a cowboy, a man who fixed fences and doctored calves and worked until his body ached. Fixing a broken heart was a different kind of work, and he felt useless at it. Their days followed a strict pattern. Up before the sun, a quiet breakfast where the only sounds were the clink of spoons and the hiss of the old percolator. He'd get Lily on the school bus, watching her small form disappear inside without a backwards glance. Then it was just him and the work. He'd mend the same stretch of fence the snow had weakened last winter. He'd check on the small herd of cattle, their breath-making clouds in the chilly air. He'd come in for a solitary lunch, the silence of the kitchen pressing in on him. That particular afternoon, the sky began to change. It wasn't a dramatic shift at first, just a thick, gray blanket rolling in from the distant mountains, swallowing up the pale blue. The wind picked up, turning from a sigh into a low whistle. John felt it, that old familiar prickling on his neck. A storm was coming, and it was coming fast. He finished up with the tractor, his movements hurried. He needed to check the far northern fence line before it hit. That stretch ran along a rarely used county road, and if it came down, his best bull could wander off. He grabbed Lily from the bus stop, the first fat flakes of snow beginning to spiral down. "Big one's coming, kiddo," he said, buckling her in. She just nodded, her nose pressed against the cold window. Back at the house, he got her settled with some crackers and a book. "I'll be back before it gets bad." Just one quick check. He saw a flicker of worry in her eyes, but she just hugged her rabbit tighter. By the time he reached the far fence line, the world had turned white. Snow fell not in flakes, but in a furious swirling sheet. The wind howled, shoving his truck sideways on the gravel. His headlights carved 2 weak tunnels in the blinding mess. This was a mistake. He knew it now. He should have turned back. He was peering ahead, looking for the break in the post line, when a flash of color caught his eye. Not the dull brown of sagebrush or the gray of rock. It was a deep, rusty red, like old bricks. He slowed the truck to a crawl, squinting. It was a patch of fabric, maybe. A piece of trash blown in from who knows where. But something in his gut told him to stop. He pulled over, the truck idling roughly. He shoved his hat down tight, pulled his collar up, and stepped out into the storm. The wind hit him like a wall, stealing his breath. He trudged toward the spot of color, his boots sinking into the fresh snow. It was a woman. She was curled on her side in the ditch, half buried already by the drifting snow. She wasn't moving. John's heart hammered against his ribs. He knelt down, his gloves brushing the snow from her face. Her skin was a terrible, pale color against the dark of her hair. She was younger than him, he thought, but it was hard to tell. Her clothes, a thin wool coat and jeans, were soaked through. One of her hands was curled shut, and he could see the glint of small beaded bracelets on her wrist. She was from the reservation, he realized. The Arapaho community was about 20 miles east. What was she doing out here, so far from anything in this? He felt for a pulse at her neck. It was there, a faint, fluttering beat under his cold fingers. A ragged breath puffed from her lips, a small cloud in the freezing air. She was alive, but just barely. "Hey," he said, his voice rough from the wind. "Hey, can you hear me?" Her eyelids trembled, but didn't open. She was freezing to death right in front of him. There was no time to call for help, no time to think. If he left her to go get help, she'd be gone. It was that simple. John Walker was a strong man. He hauled hay bales and calves for a living. But lifting her dead weight out of that snowy ditch was one of the hardest things he'd ever done. He got his arms under her, her head lolling against his shoulder. She was light, too light. He carried her the short, brutal distance to the truck, heaving her into the passenger seat. He blasted the heat, turned the vents toward her, and covered her with the old horse blanket he kept behind the seat. The drive back to the ranch house was a white-knuckle nightmare. The world had disappeared into a roaring white void. He drove by memory more than sight, creeping along, terrified he'd slide off into a gully. All the while, he kept glancing at the woman beside him. Her breathing was shallow and quick. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story. All he knew was that he had found her, and if he didn't get her warm, the storm would finish what it had started. Finally, the dark shape of his barn, and then his house loomed out of the whiteness. He pulled right up to the front porch. He ran inside, finding Lily right where he'd left her, her eyes wide with fear at the storm. "I need your help, Lilybug," he said, his voice urgent but calm. "There's a lady outside. She's very cold. I'm going to bring her in." He went back out, gathered the woman into his arms again, and carried her across the threshold. He took her straight to the small living room, laying her on the warm rug in front of the stone fireplace, where a low fire still glowed. Lily stood in the doorway, clutching the doorframe, watching. "Get the thick blankets from my bed," John instructed, "and the first aid kit from the bathroom cabinet." Lily scampered off, silent but quick. John worked methodically. He peeled off the woman's soaked coat and boots. Her feet were like ice. He wrapped her in the dry blankets Lily brought, then turned to stoke the fire, adding more logs until the flames leapt and crackled, throwing a fierce heat into the room. He rubbed her hands gently, trying to get the blood flowing. The woman stirred then, a low moan escaping her lips. Her eyes, dark and clouded with fever and confusion, opened for just a second. They looked at the fire, then at his face, then at little Lily hovering in the doorway. There was no understanding in that look, only a deep animal fear and suffering. Then her eyes closed again, and a shivering fit took hold of her, her whole body shaking violently under the blankets. John sat back on his heels, breathing hard. The smell of wet wool and wood smoke filled the room. The wind screamed against the windows, but in here there was a new, fragile silence. He had gotten her out of the storm. But as he looked at her pale, shivering form, and then at his daughter's frightened face, he knew the storm wasn't over. It had just come inside. The next 3 days were a strange, quiet blur in the Walker house. The howling storm outside turned into a deep, muffled silence as the snow piled high, burying fences and painting the world in a thick layer of white. Inside, the usual quiet was different now. It was a watching kind of quiet. The woman, who they still did not know, slept on the old sofa they had pulled close to the fireplace. John had set up a small cot for himself in the living room, wanting to keep an eye on her through the night. The fever he had suspected took hold of her completely. She would drift in and out, muttering words in a language he didn't understand, her voice a soft, troubled stream. Sometimes she spoke in English, but it made little sense fragments about a grandmother, about a river, about being lost. John did what he could. He was no doctor, but he knew basic care. He made sure she drank sips of water or broth whenever she was awake enough to swallow. He kept the fire roaring day and night, the heat in the room becoming almost too much to bear. He used cool cloths on her forehead when the fever seemed at its worst. It was awkward, tending to a stranger like this. He was careful, respectful, always announcing his presence in a low voice before he approached. "Just gonna check the blanket," he'd say, or "need you to try and drink a little." Lily was his shadow during all of this. The initial fear in her eyes had changed into a deep, curious watchfulness. She didn't come too close, preferring to sit on the bottom step of the stairs or in the doorway to the kitchen, her knees pulled up to her chin. She would watch for hours, her big eyes missing nothing, the way her father carefully tilted the cup, the way the woman's hand sometimes twitched on the blanket. On the second morning, the woman was more awake. Her eyes, now clear of some of the fever, focused on John as he offered her some tea. She looked at him for a long time, as if trying to place where she was and who he was. "Where is this?" Her voice was scratchy, like dry leaves. "My ranch," John said. "You were in the ditch on the county road." "In the storm." A memory seemed to flicker in her eyes, followed by a wave of pain. She tried to sit up a little, then sank back with a soft groan. She looked down at the clean flannel shirt she was wearing, one of John's, and then around the simple, worn room. Her gaze landed on Lily, sitting perfectly still on the stairs. Lily didn't look away. "My name is Alara," the woman said softly, her eyes still on the girl. "John, and that's Lily." Alara gave the smallest nod to Lily. Lily, after a moment, gave a tiny nod back. It was the first communication between them. John called the local doctor that afternoon. Old Dr. Evans was in his 70s and had seen everything in this county. He made the difficult drive out, his truck crunching through the deep snow. He examined Ilara in the living room, his movements slow and kind. Afterward, he spoke to John in the front porch, their breath making clouds in the cold air. "You did the right thing, John. A few more hours out there, and she wouldn't have made it. Frostbite was starting on her fingers and toes, but you got her warm in time. No lasting damage. The fever's just her body fighting off a nasty case of exposure. She's weak as a kitten, but she'll mend." "Who is she?" John asked, voicing the question that had been hanging in the air. "Her family's from over on the reservation, I believe," the doctor said, pulling his scarf tighter. "I've seen her before. She works at the community college sometimes, teaching about plants and traditional crafts. Quiet person. Keeps to herself." He gave John a long look. "She's lucky you found her. Not many were out in that mess." Knowing a little about her didn't make the situation less strange. Alara began to recover her strength, but she was a silent guest. She ate the simple meals John prepared: soup, toast, scrambled eggs, with a quiet thank you. She spent most of her time resting or looking out the window at the endless white world. She watched John and Lily, too. John noticed it. She saw the way he tried to talk to Lily, only to get a whisper or a nod in return. She saw the way Lily helped, but always from a distance, like a little ghost in her own home. One evening, John was in the kitchen washing dishes. Lily was supposed to be doing her homework at the table, but she was just staring at her pencil. Alara was sitting in the armchair by the fire, wrapped in a blanket. Her voice, still weak, broke the quiet. "That horse in the big picture," Alara said, looking at a framed photograph on the wall. It showed John's wife on her favorite moray, both of them looking young and happy. "Was she a good rider?" John turned, a plate in his hand. He was surprised by the question. "She was," he said, his voice a bit tight. "One of the best." Alara nodded slowly. "You can see it. The horse is calm, happy. Only a good rider makes a horse look that peaceful." She paused, Then her eyes shifted to Lily. "Do you ride, Lily?" Lily looked up, startled to be addressed directly. She shook her head quickly, looking down at her hands. "It's hard to start," Ilara said, her voice gentle. "Horses are very big. They feel everything you feel." She didn't say anything else, just went back to looking at the fire. The next day, the snow finally stopped and a bright, cold sun shone. The doctor had said Ilara was well enough to travel if she had a ride home. John offered to take her. The ride to the edge of the reservation was quiet. When he pulled up to the small, neat house she pointed to, she turned to him. "Thank you, John Walker," she said. Her words were formal, carrying a weight to them. "You saved my life. I won't forget that." He just nodded, feeling awkward. "Glad you're okay." She opened the truck door, the cold air rushing in. But before she got out, she looked back at him. Her eyes were dark and serious. She looked like she wanted to say something more, but she just gave him one last, slow look that saw the tired man, the quiet house, the lonely little girl, and then she slipped out. Closing the door softly behind her, John watched her walk to her door, a straight, proud figure against the snow. He drove home feeling like something was unfinished. He had pulled her from the snow, but he had a strange feeling that the cold she had brought in with her, the quiet emptiness she had seen in his home, was still there, waiting. He had given her back her life. He wondered, as his own house came into view, what was supposed to fill the quiet he had left behind. The week after the woman left was the hardest one John could remember in a long time. The quiet in the house didn't just return. It felt louder, heavier somehow. Before, the quiet had just been their normal life, sad as it was. Now it felt like an empty space where something important had briefly been and then was gone. It was a quiet that reminded him of what was missing. Lily seemed to feel it too. She went back to her old habits, but with a new kind of restlessness. She would finish her after-school snack and then just stand in the middle of the kitchen, as if she'd forgotten what to do next. She looked out the front window more, not at anything in particular, just looking. John tried to fill the silence. He talked more about the chores, about the weather, about a funny-looking bird he'd seen. His words felt clumsy and too loud, dropping into the quiet and then just sinking without a trace. Lily would nod or give a tiny M, but her eyes were somewhere else. He was out in the barn fixing a harness one afternoon, the cold metal of the buckles numbing his fingers, when he saw a car coming down the long driveway. It wasn't a truck, but a small, older sedan, kicking up a little dust from the gravel. He straightened up, wiping his hands on his jeans, a knot of worry forming in his stomach. Visitors were rare. The car stopped near the house. The door opened, and the woman got out. It was her, Ilara. She was dressed in a simple, warm coat and jeans, her dark hair pulled back. She looked healthy, strong. In her hands, she carried a large, flat basket with a cloth over it. She didn't walk toward the house, but stood by her car, looking around. As if waiting for permission, John walked out of the barn, nodding to her. "Afternoon?" he called out. She nodded back. John, Lily must have seen from the window, because the front door opened slowly, and she peeked out, her body half hidden behind the wood. Ilara looked from John to Lily, and then back to John. She took a few steps closer, but not too close. "I came to thank you," she said. "Properly." "You already did," John said. "No need." "There is a need," she said, her voice firm but quiet. She looked over at Lily again, who was watching with wide, curious eyes. "May I speak plainly?" John nodded, crossing his arms against the chill. "You saved my body from the cold," Ilara said. She paused, choosing her words with care. "But there is more than one kind of cold. I sat in your home for days. I saw your kindness. I also saw the quiet. Her eyes went to Lily, who hadn't moved from the door. That kind of quiet in a child. It is a deep frost. It needs sun to melt it. John felt a flash of something defensiveness, maybe, or shame. She's been through a lot. We both have. I know, Elara said softly. I am not judging. I am offering. She lifted the basket slightly. You gave me my life back. Let me try to help with hers. Not as a doctor or a teacher. Just as a person. Someone from outside this quiet. John was confused. How? Let me come. Twice a week. After school. Let me spend time with her. She saw the doubt on his face. I was raised by my grandmother. She taught me the old ways, not just stories, but things to do with your hands. How to bead so you can tell a story without words. How to understand the horses, not just ride them. How to listen to things that don't speak. She glanced at the little girl. She is a listener. I can see that. Maybe she needs something to listen to besides the quiet. John was stunned. This was the last thing he expected. He looked at Lily. She was fully in the doorway now, clutching the frame, her whole body leaning forward as if pulled by a string. He saw a look on her face he hadn't seen in 2 years. It wasn't quite hope, but it was a deep, burning curiosity. It was the look of someone who has seen a light in a very dark room. His first instinct was to say no. It was strange. She was a stranger, really. What did he know about her? But then he thought about the past week, about the heavy quiet, about Lily just standing in the kitchen. He thought about how useless he felt. He was a rancher. He could teach her to drive a tractor or tie a knot, but he didn't know how to reach the little girl who was lost inside. It wouldn't be anything bad, Elara said, as if reading his thoughts. Just time. Just some different things to see and touch. If it doesn't help, I will not come again. You have my word. John let out a long breath that clouded in the air. He looked at Elara. Her face was serious, honest. He looked at Lily. Her eyes were locked on his, and for the first time in forever, she was silently pleading for something. Okay, he said, the word feeling strange in his mouth. Okay, we can try it. A small, barely there smile touched Elara's lips. She didn't make a big deal of it. She simply turned and walked toward the house, stopping a few feet from the porch steps. She looked up at Lily. Hello again, Lily, she said. Hi, Lily whispered, the sound almost lost in the breeze. Elara lifted the cloth on her basket. Inside, John could see small bags of colorful beads, some pieces of soft leather, and a few spools of thread. I brought some things, Elara said. Would you like to see? Lily nodded, her head moving in a quick, jerky motion. Can we sit on the porch step? The afternoon sun is still warm there. Lily nodded again and slowly sat down on the top step. Elara sat on the step below, placing the basket between them. She didn't rush. She took out a small piece of tanned deerskin and a few tiny bags. My grandmother said that before we had books, we used beads like words. Different colors meant different things. Blue for the sky, green for the earth, yellow for the sun. She poured a few bright blue beads into her palm. They caught the light, sparkling like tiny pieces of ice. Lily leaned in. Her breath held. John stood by the barn, watching. He felt like he was intruding on something private. He saw Elara hand Lily a single bead and a long, fine needle with thread. He saw her large, calloused hands demonstrate a simple motion, then guide Lily's small fingers with a touch so light it was barely there. He couldn't hear what they were saying, but he didn't need to. He saw Lily's shoulders, usually hunched up near her ears, slowly begin to relax. He saw her head bend over the work, a look of fierce concentration on her face that pushed away the blank sadness. He saw her, after a long minute, point to a red bead and look up at Alara with a question in her eyes. Alara smiled, a real smile this time, and nodded. John turned and walked back into the dim barn. The familiar smells of hay and leather and oil greeted him. He picked up the harness he was fixing, but his hands didn't move. He just stood there, listening to the absolute silence of the barn, and for the first time, the silence didn't feel like an enemy. It just felt like silence, because out on the porch, in the low afternoon sun, there was a quiet of a different kind. It was the quiet of two people speaking, not with words, but with the gentle click-click of beads on leather. And for now, that was enough. The old porch step, warmed by the afternoon sun, became their classroom. It started with beads. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Alara's car would come down the driveway right after the school bus left. She would bring her basket, and she and Lily would sit side by side. At first, Lily barely spoke. She would listen, her eyes following Alara's hands as if they held a secret. Alara didn't push. She would talk softly about the beads. "This dark blue isn't for any old sky," she said one day, holding one up. "It's for the very deep night sky, just before the stars come out. That's a brave color. It holds all the darkness without being afraid of it." Lily would select a bead, her small fingers careful, and Alara would nod approval. John made himself scarce during these hours. He'd find chores in the barn or out in the far pasture, giving them space. But he'd watch from a distance, his heart doing a funny little twist in his chest. He saw the first real change one Thursday. He was pretending to fix a hinge on the tackroom door when he heard it. It was Lily's voice. It wasn't a whisper, but a real, clear sentence. "What about the red one?" John froze, the screwdriver loose in his hand. He didn't hear Alara's answer, but he heard a soft murmur of conversation. It was like hearing music from a forgotten song. He had to turn away, his eyes suddenly stinging. He wasn't a man who cried, but right then, he had to lean against the rough wood of the barn and take a few deep breaths. The beads turned into something more. Alara started bringing small pieces of tanned leather. She showed Lily how to make a simple bracelet. "This isn't just decoration," Alara explained. "Long ago, someone might wear a pattern like this to remind them of a promise, or a person, or a journey they took. You are making a story you can wear on your wrist." Lily worked with a seriousness that made her look much older. When she finished her first bracelet, a simple line of blue, green, and yellow beads, she showed it to her father that evening at supper. "Look," she said. Holding out her wrist, John took her hand gently, turning it to see the beads catch the light. "It's beautiful, Lilybug," he said, his voice thick. "What's the story?" She thought for a moment, her brow furrowed. "It's the ranch," she said quietly. "The blue is the big sky. The green is the grass in summer. The yellow is the sun on the barn roof." She looked up at him, checking to see if it was a good story. "It's a perfect story," he said. And it was. Then, one afternoon, Alara didn't go to the porch. She stood in the yard and looked toward the corral where John's two older, gentle Mares stood dozing in the sun. "Today," she said to Lily, "we visit the horses." Lily hung back immediately, her small hand finding the hem of her shirt to twist. She loved the horses from afar, but was deeply afraid of their size and their sudden movements. "We will not ride," Alara said. "We will not even go in the corral. We will just stand at the fence and be with them." They walked over together. The Mare, a dusty brown horse named Daisy, lifted her head and ambled over, curious. Lily took a small step behind Alara. "People think you talk to a horse with your voice," Alara said, leaning her arms on the top fence rail. But that is not the first language. The first language is breath. She took a slow, deep breath in and let it out in a long, audible sigh. Daisy's ears twitched forward. She knows that sound. That is the sound a horse makes when it feels safe. Try it. Breathe in deep and let it out like you're very tired. Lily, her eyes wide on the horse, mimicked the breath. It was shaky at first. She did it again, and then a third time, longer and slower. See? Elara whispered. She's listening. Now just stand. Don't try to pet her. Don't try to give her a name. Just let her be a horse, and you be a girl. Share the same air. They stood there for 20 minutes, not moving. John watched from the kitchen window, a dish towel forgotten in his hands. He saw Lily's rigid little back slowly soften. He saw Daisy, the Marais, eventually lower her head and start to lazily crop the grass near the fence, completely at ease with the two figures there. Lily didn't touch the horse that day, but the fear in her shoulders was gone, replaced by a calm watchfulness. The next time, Elara brought a brush. This is how you say hello with your hands, she said. She showed Lily how to brush Daisy's neck in long, slow strokes, following the direction of the hair. You are not taking anything away. You are giving attention. It is a gift. Lily's first strokes were feather-light, but as Daisy leaned into the touch, Lily's confidence grew. John, from the barn, saw a small smile touch his daughter's lips as she worked. It was a sight more precious to him than any sunrise over his land. Weeks turned into a month. The transformation in Lily wasn't dramatic. She didn't become a chatterbox. But the dead, hollow quiet was gone. It was replaced by a living, peaceful quiet. She would hum sometimes while drawing. She started to ask John questions at supper. Do horses dream? What do you think the red bead means for bravery? She showed him a new pattern she was planning, her words tumbling out a little faster than before. One evening, John was building a fire in the fireplace. Lily was on the rug, working on a new, more complicated beading project. She was stitching a horse shape onto a small square of leather. Elara says this pattern is for strength. It is gentle. Lily said, not looking up from her work. That sounds like a good kind of strength, John said. Adding a log, Lily was quiet for a few minutes, the needle moving in and out. Dad? Yeah, bub. Is Mom? Is she like the deep blue bead? The one that holds the dark? The question was so sudden, so big, that it stole the air from John's lungs. He sat back on his heels, the firelight dancing on his face. He had tried to talk about her mother before, but Lily would always shut down, the walls going up. Now she was asking using the language she was learning. He thought carefully. Yeah, he said, his voice rough. Yeah, I think she is. She's not afraid of the dark. She's part of the sky we look at every night. Lily nodded, her small face serious in the firelight. That's what I thought. She went back to her beading, a single tear slipping down her cheek, but she didn't sob or run away. She just let it fall and kept stitching her gentle strength horse. John realized then what Elara had been doing. It wasn't just about beads or horses. She was giving Lily a new language, a language of colors, of breath, of quiet attention, to talk about things that ordinary words were too heavy and too painful to carry. She was melting the deep frost, not with a roaring fire, but with the steady, warm light of the sun. And for the first time in 2 long years, John felt the ice around his own heart begin to crack, just a little, letting a small stream of warmth back in. Spring finally came to the ranch. The snow melted into muddy creeks, and the first brave blades of green grass pushed through the brown earth. The change in the season felt like it matched the change inside the house. The heavy winter quiet was gone, replaced by the sounds of life, the chirping of returned birds, the lowing of the cattle, and the soft, occasional hum of Lily as she worked on a project at the kitchen table. John noticed it in 100 small ways. The way Lily now ran to the fence to greet Daisy the Marais, who would amble over and nuzzle her pockets for apple slices. The way she would set the table for supper without being asked, sometimes placing a little beaded figure she'd made next to his plate. She was talking more, not in a flood, but in steady, clear streams. She told him about what she was learning in school, about a funny cloud shape she'd seen, about a new bead pattern Alara had shown her. Her voice was no longer a ghost in the halls. It was the sound of a little girl finding her way home. Alara kept coming, every Tuesday and Thursday, like clockwork. The lessons had deepened. They weren't just on the porch anymore. They were in the barn, where Lily learned to properly clean and oil a saddle. Alara teaching her that caring for the tools was as important as using them. They were in the kitchen, where Alara showed her how to make a simple tea from wild mint she'd brought, talking about how plants could offer comfort. They walked the edges of the pasture, Alara pointing out the first wildflowers and telling old stories about the land that weren't written in any of Lily's schoolbooks. John watched it all with a gratitude so deep it felt like a physical ache in his chest. He tried to thank Alara once, awkwardly, when she was leaving. "What you're doing for her." "I don't know how to." She had held up a hand, stopping him. "We are just walking a path together," she said. The path was already here. She just needed a hand to hold for a little while. Her answer, as always, took the focus off herself and put it on the doing, on the learning. It made his thanks feel small, but in a good way. Then, on a bright, clear Thursday in late spring, Alara's visit felt different from the start. She arrived with her basket, but she also carried a small, carefully wrapped package. Her usual calmness was touched with a hint of something solemn. She and Lily did their usual things. They brushed Daisy. They worked on a beading project, but John could sense a shift. When the afternoon sun began to stretch the shadows long, Alara turned to Lily. "Today is my last visit," she said, her voice gentle. Lily's head snapped up, her needle freezing mid-stitch. The color seemed to drain from her face. John, who was oiling a saddle across the barn, felt his own heart clutch. He hadn't thought about this day ending. But why? Lily whispered, her voice trembling on the edge of the quiet she just left behind. "Because the work is done," Alara said, smiling softly. She reached out and touched the bracelet on Lily's wrist, the first one she'd ever made. "You have your language back. You know how to listen to the horses, to tell stories with your hands, to see the sky in a bead. You don't need me to show you anymore. The path is yours to walk now." Tears welled in Lily's eyes, but she didn't cry out. She just looked down at her hands. "I have something for you," Alara said. She handed Lily the small package. Lily unwrapped it slowly. It was a pendant on a leather cord. The pendant was a beautifully beaded horse, its head turned gently to the side, made with dark blue, earthy brown, and a streak of sun yellow. It was strong and peaceful and kind. "This is for strength that is gentle," Alara said, echoing Lily's own words from months before. "And for friendship that doesn't end just because the visits do. You can wear it, and you will remember." Lily clutched the pendant in her small fist, holding it to her chest. She couldn't speak, but she launched herself forward, wrapping her arms tightly around Alara's waist. Alara held her close for a long moment, resting her cheek on the top of the girl's head. Then Alara stood. She looked over at John and nodded toward the front porch. He followed her outside, the screen door clicking shut behind them. The evening air was cool and sweet, with the smell of damp earth. She turned to face him. For a moment, she just looked at him, really looked at him, seeing the tired lines on his face that had softened, the worry in his eyes that had eased. "John Walker," she began, her voice low and full of meaning. "You gave me back my life that night in the snow. That is a debt I can never fully repay." He started to shake his head, to say it was nothing, but she continued. "But you must see something," she said. Her eyes went to the window, where they could see Lily sitting on the rug, staring at her new pendant with wonder. "You did not just save a life. You brought me here. You let me into your home. And in doing that, you gave me the chance to help her find her voice." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "That gift you have given me, the gift of being useful, of helping that child shine again, it is far greater. You did not just pull me from a ditch. You brought me to a purpose." John stood silent, her words turning his own understanding of that stormy night upside down. He had thought it was a simple act, a desperate rescue. He never imagined it was the first step in a circle that would come all the way back to heal his own family. "The circle is complete," Elara said softly, with a finality that felt peaceful, not sad. "The cold is gone from this house." She stepped off the porch and walked to her car. She didn't look back with a dramatic wave, just a simple, calm glance as she got in and started the engine. John watched her car disappear down the dusty driveway, the way he had months before. This time, it felt different. It didn't feel like an ending that left an empty space. It felt like a door closing gently on a room that had finally been warmed up. He turned and went inside. Lily was still on the rug. She had put the pendant on. It lay against her shirt, the beaded horse catching the last of the evening light. She looked up at him, her eyes still wet but clear. "I'm going to make her something," Lily announced, her voice firm. "The best thing I've ever made. To say thank you." John walked over and sat down on the floor beside her, something he hadn't done in a long time. "That sounds like a good plan," he said. He put his arm around her, and she leaned into his side, her small fingers tracing the beads on her new pendant. They sat there together as the fire crackled in the hearth, not needing to fill the silence with words. The quiet in the room was no longer a hollow thing. It was a peaceful, living quiet, full of the memory of stories told and the promise of stories yet to be made. The storm was long over, and the sun, at last, was shining right through the windows, warming the worn wooden floors of the old ranch house.